our first panelist is going to be Doug Christen, who is a local farmer who focuses especially on growing greens, vegetables, some animal production on a very hands-on scale. At one time, Doug and his wife Kat were operating a CSA called Smaller Footprint. They've kind of evolved with their operation over the years, including Kat beginning to the farm on behalf of Antioch College and their local food operation for their students. And they sell at this point largely directly through farmers market and that through taking orders for some of the meat products that they're able to produce on their farm. So we appreciate very much having you with us today. Doug, take it away.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Thank you. And as Krista said, we operate a small farm near Yellow Springs, focusing primarily on vegetables, wide range of vegetables that we sell at the farmers market, and been asked to talk about how climate change seems to be affecting our farm. One of the things that we are seeing is that we are having we're having dramatic events. They're different from year to year, but certainly dramatic events. We might have a warmer spring, but then a real cold spell late in the spring. Like last year, we had one in beginning of May where it got very cold, and that meant all of our fruit trees, which had already been in flower, we lost all the fruit because they were in bloom when we had a hard freeze. Severe wind events. We picked up debris out of our field and garden from the Dayton tornadoes. We were picking that debris up out of our field. The rain events. We get, it'll be dry and then you get a 4-inch or 6-inch rain event. And those can, despite our best efforts, wash away a lot of things. And again, just the variability. The springs we haven't, even though springs might have been warmer, because of the variability, it's hard to plan. We can't count on the whole spring being warmer to get things started earlier, because we might have that late cold snap. So we have to try to plan for that. Some of the ways that we're planning for that is to provide some structure to cover crops, using row covers, planting things in hoop houses so that we can moderate some of those changes, protect plants from hail events, from wind events, from extreme cold events. But one of the things that we've really been doing from the beginning, even though it's not in response to climate change that we've been doing, is just building soil health. That has been the foundation, and we've seen how that has helped a lot. Like when we started farming on our site 15 years ago, the soil organic matter was at about 1.5%. And through using compost, cover crops, reduced tillage, all of those practices, we've increased the soil organic matter up to about 5-6%. And that has allowed there to be a lot less runoff when we do have extreme rain events. It also allows the soil to hold more moisture when into drier events. And so that has helped to moderate a lot of the effects that we're seeing from climate change. And then it also just provides for healthier plants, which are better able to withstand the variability that we're seeing in the climate. Let's see. Also asked to talk a little bit about how we've experienced COVID in the last year on the farm, how that has affected. Um, it it hasn't affected our growing per se, but we've had to adjust our marketing, and our markets have had to change to accommodate the spacing, the social distancing that has needed to take place. So we had to, move locations for the market throughout the season, space things apart. Sales have been consistent though, and the community has really supported us. So we're appreciative of that as people are looking for local sources of food. Um, let's see. I think that's about it. We'll leave some time for other people.
Okay, thank you, Doug. I appreciate it. It it's I just got a chance to look at the participant list. It's really nice to see the group that we have out there. Definitely a varied group. It's good both to see people that I really haven't run into before, but also people that have been following this Jacoby Partnership Series. Glad to have you with us, and really appreciate your continuing participation in the series. I think that we want to go ahead and probably go through. I'm thinking at this point, Rachel, both of our presentations and then questions for everybody, and hopefully we'll get most of Bryan's. Bryan can be in on most of the questions as well, but I think we'll go ahead and do Bryan's presentation, and then do Roger, and then questions. I think that kind of makes the most sense since
Okay.
we're kind of running a little bit late. Bryan Thompson owns the biggest farm that Tecumseh Land Trust protects, formerly the farm of Eugene Kavanaugh in fertile, beautiful Ross Township of Greene County, Ohio. I met Bryan's grandfather, Roger, long before I met Bryan. He was a very interesting man, lifelong farmer, very committed to agriculture, concerned about getting new farmers into land and onto the land as well. And I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to know him. This is a multi-generational farm family, and Bryan is a pretty busy farmer with many thousand acres sometimes under cultivation, and we really appreciate him being here with us today. He is also doubling dad time with his son's basketball tournament, so we
Yep.
appreciate him being able to get in on some of the conversation. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to be here. I apologize for my surroundings. A little short on time. I didn't have time to make it to the office today, and my kids and my dogs do not understand what a minute of quiet time means. So I'm sitting in my car. So my wife and I farm 4,200 acres in Clark, Greene, Madison, and Fayette County. Grow corn and soybeans, and that's the only things that we grow. Our soybeans go to Bluegrass Farms in Jeffersonville, Ohio, and they export those, clean those, and export those non-GMO soybeans generally to Japan to make miso and tofu. And our corn is almost exclusively goes to Dayton, the Cargill plant in Dayton for high fructose corn syrup. We do cereal rye cover crop ahead of all of our soybeans. Last year, we didn't do as much this year. We had a little bit of trouble with the cereal rye last year ahead of the beans with just keeping us out of the fields a little bit, which is kind of counterintuitive to what I thought would happen. We left it green, but it was on some of our wetter farms, and it just wouldn't dry out as fast as the other farms that were bare. It cost me about a day every time it rained, and last spring was pretty rough as far as the rain goes. Our yield was fine. The weed control was excellent from the cereal rye, and the soil health it's a good thing, and it keeps the soil the erosion down a lot. But I just took a break from that just to get back on track and figure out exactly how I wanted to do things. We experienced climate change like everybody else has said. Dr. Wilson, pointed out, he confirmed everything that we're seeing. Bigger rain events, more runoff, drier in the summer, hotter in the summer. And what we've done with that, my family has been no-till farmers since 1992. My dad and Gene Kavanaugh, who owned this farm, had one of the first fields in Clark County that was no-till. They had a soybean field after alfalfa, and it was a complete disaster. But they worked on it and they figured it out from there. So we're generally no-till or strip-till. We put the dry fertilizer down in a strip in the fall ahead of our corn crop and plant right on top of that a lot. A couple other things that we've done with climate change is we've put in probably 8.5 miles of grass waterway, which is a program through the NRCS and the USDA. They design the waterways and help you, they approve them and help pay for them. And so that's been a really good program for us. And we grow just non-GMO soybeans, not non-GMO corn. And then the other thing that we've worked really hard on is our drain tile. We put in a lot of drain tile, and what that does for us, it draws about 3/4 of an inch of rain a day off of the field. So as we get these bigger rain events, we're drawing more down through the soil profile, and we're also, which keeps it from being runoff and eroding our fields, and it also keeps the fields from being saturated as long, keeps the air in them, keeps the soil health and tilth alive in those fields. So we started really tiling our farms in 2011, and we've ramped that up as the bigger rains in the spring have gotten worse, the wet springs. And then COVID really hasn't affected us much. We've obviously had to be considerate of our people, making sure we're spaced out. We've gone through different times of the year where we're not that busy. We've split our crew up and run half the crew on, every other day just to keep people separated. But in season, we're in machines and we're spread out, and it really hasn't affected us that much. We were really concerned about getting products this last spring, and it really turned out to not be a problem. Now this spring, active ingredients for chemicals, fertilizer, everything is getting really, really hard to get. But it seems like most people have it in place for that. So we're still concerned about the transportation and the manufacturing of products. The USDA, I think, has done a great job with their programs, such as the Waterways. I think that the continued outreach for the cover crops and bringing in presenters that actually know how to do it to help us, because cover crops are tough for large scale operations to do, because they take you got to be very specific and do it correctly and pay a lot of attention. They take a fair amount of management to get done correctly on a big scale. And it can always be a disaster, which we've had a few disasters with our cover crops in the past. So I did want to point out, I read a Wall Street Journal article the other day. It was entitled "The Environmental Upside of Modern Farming." And I thought that this was interesting, and it was a good plug to us farmers. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, U.S. farm fertilizer usage peaked in 1981 and has remained essentially flat since then. In that time, total crop production grew 44%. So we're growing 44% more crops with the same fertilizer as we did in 1981, which I think is a great thing for us. I think we're trying to do the right thing, and we're learning and we're trying to get better. So that's about all I have about me, and
All right.
be interested to have more questions later.
Good, Bryan. Yeah, thank you so much. And I get to introduce here our third panelist, Roger Wright, who is also an area farmer, I think a little bit more in Clark County. And again, comes from a family that has been farming for some time. Also has got some experience in terms of working with cover crops and some crop diversification in recent years. And Lauren has been talking a little bit to Roger, and was able to suggest that he might be a part of our panel today. And we appreciate you joining us. Thanks, Roger.
Can you hear me okay?
Can, yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry, it's kind of dark in here. But so we farm approximately 12 to 13, somewhere between 12 and 1,300 acres, mostly southern Clark, a little bit in Greene County. Our home farm has a lot of exposure to the Little Miami, a branch of the Little Miami River, the North Fork the Little Miami River. So kind of leads into climate change affecting us. We've seen a lot of flooding along that creek and pretty much everywhere else. Kind of along what Bryan said, installed a lot of drain tile, grass waterways, had to really kind of over equip ourselves because we're trying to accomplish things that normally we had a month to do in about a week. 2019, 2020 were pretty rough. I've also added, I guess I didn't say that I grow corn, soybeans, and wheat. Wheat is kind of a recent addition for us as a way to hedge against some of the climate problems that we have. And then as well, it gives me a nice window to get a multi-species cover crop planted. Cover crops have seemed to help a lot with water infiltration, and with these droughts that we get in the summer, they retain the moisture. So kind of taking a multifaceted approach here on mitigating our risk with climate change. Bryan did a really good job of summing up a lot of what we're doing. And COVID hasn't really affected me. I'm normally a one-man operation. And so it's pretty easy for me to social distance. Little bit supply chain problems, but nothing major. And the USDA, I think they're doing a fantastic job. I would like to see a little bit more transparency in the carbon markets, but overall, I think they're doing a good job. So I don't want to be more redundant, because I think Bryan and Doug have done a good job of pretty much summing up what we're facing.
Well, thanks a lot, Roger. And I think we're getting some good questions that are lining up, I think, in the chat. And I also want to make sure that Aaron's got a chance to chime in whenever he wants to. So just whenever you unmute, I'll know you want to chime in, Aaron. I would like to hear, yeah, exactly, Ann's question. Transparency in the carbon market. What might that look like? We're hearing that, this is my addition, that the Biden administration is definitely interested in agriculture as a big part of solution response to climate change. So what could improve that?
So I saw a piece on 60 Minutes with Bill Gates. I think probably everybody here's seen that. And he made passing mention of how he personally paid $400 a ton for carbon credits. And it kind of caught me off guard. I don't know, maybe he misspoke, but the numbers I've heard as far as what we're going to get paid if we participate is more like $10 a ton. So it seems like there's a pretty big difference there. And I'd just like to have a little bit of transparency.
That is quite a big discrepancy, and I think my guess would be that we're not really doing carbon trading. Literally, we're kind of simulating at this point in time. Aaron, do you have any observations on that, or Bryan or Doug? Oh, and Lauren asked, do you have experiences working with carbon market companies such as Indigo Ag? Bryan, you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I will. Sorry, I got to figure out how to work my iPad. Yeah,
you're doing it.
Same thing as Roger. So I worked with Indigo. I've worked with Indigo over the last 4 years, I think, and their original carbon program, it's like hours and hours of paperwork, and it goes back, I think, up to 10 years. And you got to document all of your practices, which in some cases are, just really undocumentable. And that's how they assign your base, I don't know, carbon number or whatever. That's how they figure off what your new practices, how much new carbon your new practices sequester. And then
Hope you're
and they
frozen.
say that you can get up to $10 per credit, and they paid that over 10 years. So it really wasn't worth the effort that it took to get into.
Brian, you're cutting out. Maybe if you cut your video off and
That
just
no
run
one.
audio, that might give you more wavelengths. Let's try
Sure.
that.
Sure. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Sorry about
keep
that.
talking. No worries.
But the Indigo program was they were saying you could get up to like $10 an acre, and they were going to pay it over 10 years. And it just didn't seem like it was worth the hassle. But I think as we move forward, there will be more standards come about, and it will get easier to prove that and to record that.
Do you think that the practices that I kind of describe it as benchmarking what Indigo is doing? Because it seems like they're trying to get ready for more of a real and active carbon market by figuring out how to measure soil improvement and paired with the use of cover crops and more small grains in the rotation, that kind of thing. What was your experience as far as what you saw impacting on productivity and soil health?
So last year was their first year of the carbon program, and we tried 4 different mixes of cover crops ahead of corn. And there was one that was 3 bushels better, and the other 3 treatments were the same. So there was very little impact, negative impact on the cash crop. And then they have the soil test and all the data that they looked at and crunched, and I'm not privileged to that information about the differences in the soil. But again, it was only 1 year. So.
And we've got got a site there from Aaron. There's some good comments in the chat. Indigo is a private company that is also then trying to sell, I think, proprietary seed as a part of what they're doing. And so it's kind of an evolving, business model, I think, as well as science. Anything that you would add, Roger or Aaron, to that as far as carbon market or experience with Indigo? Aaron?
Yeah, so sorry, I was still muted. I think the whole transparency piece, I think, is fundamental piece of the Growing Climate Solutions Act of 2020 that's still in the House committee. And so I would agree. I think, and it's not just in ag, it's carbon trading and carbon credits for basically the globe. That transparency is critical to trust among different countries and among different constituents. And so I think the website that's promoted, the lowering those technical barriers, all of the different facets of that Growing Climate Solutions Act is really important. And I think what's good about that act is that it is really in today's environment, it's really a bipartisan effort. So it's led by Stabenow from Michigan and Braun in Indiana. And they've got others too, Whitehead. There's several Republicans and Democrats that are on board with that. And so I think it is, I think it's gaining momentum. And so, hopefully that will help bring transparency to the process as well.
So that's great. Has anybody given this citation to that bill, the number of the bill? If I'm thinking if anybody can find that, that would be really terrific. Just to say, I often will go to Washington as a part of Land Trust Alliance's efforts. OFA that we often collaborate with at Community Solutions and Tecumseh Land Trust does a lot of very good lobbying efforts. Thank you. Aaron entered that into the chat. We are looking at potentially doing a a forum on some of the legislation that's been introduced to improve access to land for Black farmers and other farmers that have not been able to get access to land in the past. But it sounds like this might also be a bill that we would really be well served to maybe do a forum on. So we'll certainly think about doing that. What's interesting to me is that there does seem intent with the Biden administration right now to try to figure out how to reinforce the best practices for the climate with farmers. And so I'm very interested in seeing what models that might take and how that might be able to be rolled out. Does anybody have any insights so far on how that might happen? Might they look to partnering with some of these private organizations that are already got their toes in the water, or how might they set that up? And just to say, I think that there's a lot of great conservation programs through NRCS and USDA, but I also have heard a lot about the downsides of those programs when it comes to kind of micromanaging some of the decisions. For example, when to harvest cover, or when to terminate cover crops. I definitely have heard a lot of complaints about that with the CSP program as a part of the Farm Bill. So any ideas on how that might be rolled out? No, not okay. Well, I think a forum in that area would be really very, very interesting. Just to say, Roger, Bryan, and Doug too, I don't think we touched on this so much with you. What would you like to see USDA doing, and what could the Biden administration do to make the existing programs for conservation more workable? Or Bryan. Doug's unmuted.
I can't really speak to this very much. I haven't been involved in many USDA programs, so in terms of improving them, I really can't speak to that. I mean, I would like to see more, research and incentives on the soil health component. I think would be good, but details of that I can't speak to.
And really the longevity of that, it seems like, is very, very important. And thank you, Aaron has got another web address that's helpful in taking a look at that. Roger, your thoughts?
I would agree 100% with what Doug said.
Got to support the research.
Yeah, I think that soil health is going to be the key to solving a lot of these problems.
It is incredible to me how much that does seem to be the case. And with our Jacoby partnership, which is really aimed to improve water quality, so much of the practices are just totally intertwined, for water quality, for soil health, but also for productivity, and for sequestering carbon. And then the use of the smaller grains in rotations is leading to some diversification in terms of products that are being grown in Ohio, and then some of the value added possibilities as well. It seems that we're getting a little bit more processing capacity in some areas. We're going to have a speaker next week that's going to talk about a malting process and barley in the rotation, and how he's worked with a number of farmers in the area, or in Ohio, in that regard. So there's definitely some cool possibilities. Bryan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the conservation has got to be where the USDA goes. Soil health, improving soil health, buffer strips around, creeks and waterways, and continuing the waterway programs. They need to continue to focus on speeding these processes up. They just get lagged down and they take forever to do some of this stuff. Then also, I don't know if I don't know whose responsibility it is, but a big thing in our market is the rivers, the Ohio River and the Mississippi River. And there hasn't been a lot of focus put on the infrastructure on mainly the Mississippi, the locks and dams on the Mississippi River, and keeping the channel clear. And that we need to continue to invest in that infrastructure to get products in and out of this particular area of Ohio.
And so really transportation is truly an issue.
It is in my line of farming with the large commercial products. So, you know, we're a lot of our soybeans, they either go out on barges, but a lot of them go out on containers. But all of our fertilizer comes in up the river, comes in from New Orleans and up the river, and is picked up out of the Cincinnati market. So, and that goes to the weather events too. All the bigger rains is bigger floods, is more stress on the locks and dams, is keeping the channel clear. All of that is really a big issue that a lot of people in our area don't really think about affecting us, but it does.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's certainly one of the things I think in our discussion with our nonprofit board for the Tecumseh Land Trust and farmers who are on the board, they're really surprised at how much of that grain is going down the Ohio to the Mississippi. I'm interested in whether there's also anybody else who's participating that would like to share anything about USDA programs. I think we had Susan Jennings on with us. Susan, if you have anything to add. And I guess also just, are there Ohio programs that we want to try to emphasize could be helpful? I know that the Coalition of Ohio Land Trusts that our land trust is a part of is very interested in the budget the governor submitted for H2 Ohio, that they might go statewide with that. That's really been focused on Northwest Ohio and basically the Maumee River Basin going into Lake Erie, but it looks like that may come to the rest of the country or the rest of the state within this next biennium if the governor gets the funding that he's asking for. And it definitely has occurred to us talking about the Jacoby partnership that we've actually, with a little bit of marketing about equip programs that can be funded, been able to pretty quickly expend all of our allotment in our partnership project for conservation practices pretty quickly. And so, you know, we're hoping that H2 Ohio availability to help people kind of close the gap on those costs for those practices might be coming and might be helpful. All right, and Aaron's also got the resource on H2 Ohio, so thank you. And I think there's some good research that's going with that too, which is pretty important. There's also some good wetland restoration that's been going on that's been a part of that, which is interesting. And one of our sister land trusts, Black Swamp Conservancy up in Northwest Ohio, has been super involved in that. And if there's not anything else on USDA anybody wants to chime in on, feel free to put stuff in the chat. But I wanted to kind of revisit the cover crop disaster and how that can go wrong. We had a question about that, which I think Bryan addressed. Let's see, is Bryan still on with us? I'm not sure if he is or not. I know he has to take off pretty soon.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm still here.
Yeah. You want to give a little example of cover crop disaster and maybe a little bit of year-to-year perspective as well, because one of the things I'm hearing is that people often will, you know, get to a point where they want to give cover crops a try, and they try one year and it doesn't go well, and that's kind of it.
Yeah, so the first year that I had cover crops was 2011. We had a lot of prevent plant that year. It was a really wet spring. So we used oats and radishes, which would winter kill. And I thought that was a great program. Then I planted corn after it, but the carbon ties up the can tie up the nitrogen, I guess. I didn't know that. And so it really hurt my corn. Now it was 2012 and it was a tough year anyway. So I'm not sure that it hurt me a ton, but it didn't help. The corn was ugly. So then we've eased back into cereal rye ahead of soybeans, which is a pretty easy, you know, kind of like a beginner type cover crop. It's pretty safe. It's pretty easy to kill. And that went really well for 2 or 3 years. And then it was a couple years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago, at my dad's farm on 72, State Route 72, right in front of the Air National Guard base. He had a beautiful stand of cereal rye that was spread in the fall, and it was just gorgeous. I mean, we thought we were really doing some good. And then we had a wet spring and we had slugs, and we just could not get rid of the slugs. And we replanted some of that field 4 times. But it goes back to, we had a wet spring. We had like 4 inches of rain July the 3rd. The slugs just never went away. So it's a management issue, but it also, especially when you're trying to do it on larger acres, the mistakes get expensive in a hurry. And then this spring, I had a really nice field of cereal rye, and it balled up the closing wheels on the planter. So, you know, it's none of it is, maybe disasters is strong, but there's some pain to learning how to do it on large acres, and it's management.
Does the Indigo program nudge people to trying more than 1 year? Is there a benefit in that?
Well, that was the idea behind their 10-year commitment and the $1 a year and all that. Their partners on the back end that are trying to buy these carbon credits once you locked in for more time, and then they want you locked into more time, because, you know, the only gain is if you do it year after year after year. It's just there's some times when, and there's some problems that you have when you're just like, I can't handle this anymore. So,
well, there's so much unpredictability anyhow. We've had Dave Brandt and family in some of our past presentations, and they've done so much work with cover crops that they've got a lot more experience with the specificity of what are you going to grow next in this field, and you know, trying to get that under control. And it's very complex. So it's interesting. Is that something that the federal government should try to incent more?
Yeah, you know, I think that our farm program payments are going to have to incentivize conservation, and cover crops are a great way to aid conservation. I think it's a natural step, and the reason cover crops are hard, you know, like Dave Brandt is great at it, you know, but he is a student of cover crops. Like, that is his thing. And there's a guy, Dan DeSutter in Indiana, who is fantastic at it on large acres. Rule-ons in Indiana are really good at it. I am not, but we'll keep trying.
Roger,
I would like to say that Dave
Susan.
Brandt he actually has started a resource service for farmers, and he has a field day, a virtual field day. I think it's on April 4th, but he's a wonderful resource for farmers because he has not just learned about his land, but also, again, provides advisory services and has a lot of data on money that gets saved on inputs. And so basically showing that the use of cover crops does end up really reducing farmers' costs in addition to building soil health. And then to respond to Krista's question about the USDA, as many people know, the 2018 Farm Bill had soil health in it for the first time. So there's actually a lot more grants out that have soil health as part of the criteria that helps people get grants. And also in the last year, and I think this will be increasing, there's been a lot more money put into regional food project grants and community food project grants. So that's something to keep an eye out for. Also, in terms of funding, I noticed we have a lot of Black farmers on the line. The Justice for Black Farmers Act which has not been passed, has been followed up by another bill that Senator Brown is part of. And if you're interested in resources for Black farmers, Rachel put up on the chat a link to a newsletter that we're putting out quarterly that has resources for Black growers. And then just a shout out to Krista, because as part of the Jacoby partnership, which she worked, she and Michelle, her partner in crime, worked really hard to get the Jacoby partnership, and really so many farmers in our region have benefited from us, including Agraria. We were able this year to get some wells and hoop house and some fencing for rotational grazing. So we couldn't be happier. It would be great if more regions were able to get it, because I know in general getting equip money is not the easiest thing. So thank you for Krista for that. And if folks are interested in that, in I guess 2 weeks, we'll be talking a little bit more about our work on Agraria.
Yeah, on March 13th, we'll focus on Agraria. And that's been one of the things through this Growing Green series that we're really kind of catching up on every year. A part of the project is our Jacoby partnership is restoring stream area that has been very hard to farm around over the years on the Agraria property. And the Nature Conservancy is working with that. And so that's progressing and very exciting. But then the restoration of the farm ground that surrounds it as well is a really big deal. We're excited because we are getting some research established related to these conservation practices in conjunction with Central State. And so that's really kind of nice that that's been able to happen with all of the EQIP funded properties and projects. They've got some baseline soil testing that's been done by a professor at Central State, who is going to be presenting on March 20th, actually, about what he's doing and how that overlaps with definitely with these kinds of programs. So I wanted to kind of go back a little bit to, just Brian's going to have to hop off pretty soon. Brian, do you have anything else? Because I want to kind of go back to direct sales and a little bit more of what Doug has been doing in COVID. But Brian or Roger, more on cover crops or USDA?
Nope. I think I've said plenty, but I really appreciate you guys having me. It's been a really good experience. It was a really interesting session that you guys had, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Absolutely. We've had a great time putting these together along with a couple of Susan's staff for Community Solutions. We've done some pre-conference discussions, and it's just a joy. It's amazing to me how much fun this whole series has been so far. We've really gotten to know a lot of people better, or people that we didn't know in the past, and gotten a chance to work with them, which has been great. Is there anything, Roger, as far as cover crops or directly USDA that you want to loop back to?
No, I can't think of anything. I'm sure I will in about 10 minutes though.
Well, that's okay. We forgot 10 minutes, so that's good. It's good. You're in time. Well, I wanted to kind of loop back to direct sales during COVID and seeing, whether there's any optimistic signs in terms of the spotlight on lack of food security or lack of good food distribution systems that you can see, Doug, in terms of direct sales, or Roger, any insights you have on that too?
Our community's been good in terms of the support for our direct sales, and so like we didn't see any slump or anything like that, with concerns about social distancing or anything like that. We had long 6-foot spaced lines outside at the farmers market, and so it went well. I think there's one of the things that we saw in general. I kind of got to the supply chain issue that Brian and Roger both spoke to, was last spring, because of food security concerns that a lot of people had when we kind of went into panic mode in the spring, was there was a rush on vegetable seeds. And if you didn't have your seeds, it all of a sudden became very difficult to get your seeds because people were growing their own food. And so that has been something that we've seen is a lot of interest in people growing their own food in the last year. And I hope that continues. And so I think that that has been something in terms not necessarily direct sales, but direct production of food.
I've heard there might be shortages on seeds this year. Are you seeing that?
There's been it's been slow to get seeds sometimes because there's some of the warehouses and such, because of their social distancing and criteria that they're having, their warehouses cannot have as many people necessarily on staff at a time. They're working around the clock. And so some companies have it's been slower. They've said they have the seeds. It's just taking them some time to fulfill orders and get them out. There are some things that I have, normally I would source everything through just a couple companies, but there's been things where I've had to, get to 5 or 6 or 7 companies to try to find certain things, and, finally found them and had them delivered. So minor hiccups.
Yeah, I'm wondering RE supply chains. It was interesting. I can't remember if it was Roger. I think it was Brian talking about some difficulty in getting chemicals. And I know there's some challenge with also food supply chains to the consumer. And I wonder, Aaron, if you have any sort of wisdom about that, because I know everything that just happened in Texas is impacting supply chains. I know that China is buying up a lot of commodities, and there just seems to be a lot of challenges for the food supply chain moving forward. Do you have a sense of how that impacts Ohio's farmers, both in terms of those who are growing commodities and those who are growing for the local market, like Doug? Big question.
Okay,
There we go.
Good. All right. Good.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Unfortunately, Susan, I can't really speak to that much just because besides knowing and being aware of the different food challenges and the supply chain issues that we had, certainly initially last spring, and with a lot of the meat processing plants and things like that to COVID. Other than what we've heard about through some of the supply chain issues dealing with the extreme cold, I haven't. This concept about open waterways and being able to get and transport issues and their links to climate change is very real. Last spring with the flooding and a huge amount of flooding, for instance, coming down the Missouri basin into the Mississippi basin, that really kept both products tied up, not being able to get out, and also fertilizer from getting in to that region as well. So other than those cursory kind of statements about it, I don't have too much insight, I think, that I can provide beyond that.
Roger, anything from you in terms of inputs and what you've seen the last couple of years?
As far as like the supply chain disruption, is that what you're asking? Mm-hmm. We not a tremendous amount, but a lot of the parts for our equipment and that kind of stuff is produced in China and overseas. So computer chips and things like that kind of been a struggle here and there to get our hands on.
Yeah, that just every aspect of life, including masks, right?
Yeah, the whole mask thing. I was wearing N95 respirators for the past 10 years when I sweep out grain bins, and then all of a sudden I can't get any. I'm like, what am I gonna do? But
one of the few people that's experienced
yeah.
You already knew how to breathe through them, so
yeah,
that's really a shame. I guess one of the things I'd kind of like to loop back to, let me see if there's anything in the chat that anybody thinks I'm ignoring, Susan, Lauren, Rachel, let me know. But one of the things I was interested in kind of looping back to is voluntary versus incentivized practices. What's you know, if the Biden administration is looking at voluntary practices by and large, is that a good idea? You know, should they be thinking more about incentives, and just how can we move things faster? You know, what do people need? Do they need expertise? Do they need more science to look at? It sounds like that's one of the things that's missing.
Well, certainly, and I feel like there are already a lot of incentives for farmers, but it often goes, you know, towards commodity crops and not towards specialty growers, and against the use of cover crops. So I don't think you can ask people who are doing conservation things to do it without incentives if most of the incentives go the opposite direction. So I think there's some kind of a balancing out that needs to happen. And I think it is happening. You know, it's not a static moment. I think there's a lot changing on the USDA end. But yeah, in my opinion, you do need to incentivize all the right things as quickly as possible on every level, state, federal, local.
Well, and I think seizing the moment from this last year, the combination of weather disasters and COVID is pretty important, because we don't always have very long memories, you know. And I think that the sight of grocery store shelves being empty, and people just not being able to get basic things that we are so used to getting, was really a wake-up call. But you know, what exactly are we doing with that? It also really seemed like attentiveness to food security that really already exists for a lot of people, you know, all over Ohio, was much higher back last spring. But you know, what's moving ahead with that as well?
If I could go back, Erin, with your presentation, you talked about the different climates that were both winter and summer climates. Do you have a sense of different crops that people might want to think about transitioning to that are going to be good fits for our coming weather?
Yeah,
climate.
That is an excellent question, and it's very complex, right? I alluded to this a little bit. You know, it's not as if climate means we shift entirely all of the time into a new climate that we can grow, you know, a whole new set, right, of crops. What it is it's this longer transition period, and we can debate the length of time, right? But some things are likely to work most of the time where others might not. So you know, I'm not a farmer, but when I'm thinking about, and one of the reasons I use the geographies is because then we can think about, okay, what does agriculture look like in the South Central US right now? What does it look like in Arkansas? It doesn't look like Ohio, right? And so is there a potential? Of course, there's a potential then by the end of the century, are we growing more cotton, right? Are we growing more rice? That's a question. I think it's a fair question. I can't answer it. I can't answer that question. But, you know, are we going to be growing more sorghum, you know, things like that we see in other parts, you know, Southern Illinois, Missouri, for instance? Are we going to be rotating, you know, are we going to be doing a little bit of livestock grazing differently, you know, than what we see here today? So I think that it providing those geographies of future change gives us an opportunity, I think, to engage with our farmers in other parts of the country, to think about what they're dealing with today, which could be our future. But again, it's not as if we're just going to have an Arkansas, you know, in 2040. We may have an Arkansas type season 2 or 3 out of 10 years. And that means that we have to find other ways to be, I think, flexible, you know, agile. There's not one solution that's going to work for everyone in every situation. We have to broaden that tool belt and think about ways of increasing our resilience to that variability. I think the variability is the key. And so that's where that's what I kind of look at. So, from my own research and working with researchers is a better way to say it. The cover crops, the interseeding, the intercropping, all of those things are just tools in the tool belt that might not necessarily work for everyone, but we have to be able to learn about them and implement them, and perhaps become, a little bit more savvy in how we apply those to our own situations.
It seems like there's limitations in terms of processing of grains. There's a lot of reinforcement of more small grains in the rotation through H2 Ohio and elsewhere. Is that something that Ohio State's trying to take into account, Aaron, or?
Yeah, there's a lot of research out there in terms of other small grains, looking closely at barley and things like that. But again, to this point, they've not been tremendously successful, right? And so, implementing those small grains or other means of building that resilience is obviously part of it. But you know, every conversation, and I would, the farmers, I was going to mention this earlier, whatever climate smart framework that we're working in has to lead to agronomic outcomes that benefit the farmers, right? There's a whole scale, right, of conservationists or those that are concerned with the environment, from they're not concerned about the environment at all to very concerned about the environment. But ultimately, everybody, farmers are trying to make a life and a livelihood, and so we have to find ways. And what I try to do are thinking about no regret solutions that interconnect the agronomic outcomes with the environmental outcomes. And I think that that's why I view agriculture as the key, as a climate solution, because it really does tie strongly in with more of the conservation, more of the types of environmental outcomes that we want, if done in a smart way, also lead to those agronomic outcomes. But it's not guaranteed, and there's still a lot of research there. There's been a lot of research on cover crops and diversity and all that stuff, but knowing exactly how much impact they have on building climate resilience, I think, is a huge area of research need right now. So that's what I'm trying to push forward at the university, and work with groups that, from a farmer centric, right? Researchers often, our pointy hat academics like to do this, we'll tell you what to do on your field, and let's do it that way, and we'll scientifically analyze what's happening. And that's not going to work. It has to be built with the farmers in mind, the questions that the farmers want to ask, and build it up that way. And so tying those agronomic outcomes that benefit the farmers, but also bring the environmental outcomes with them, I think that's where we put our focus.
No regret solutions is really an interesting way to put it. Doug or Roger, you guys have any observations related?
I had just a comment about like the incentives in the research, and there's a lot of the research is out there that indicates there are certain practices that should be done, and there are some incentives to say that those certain practices should be done. But I think the part that's missing, and I think Bryan spoke to it a little bit, is it needs to be demonstrated, and demonstrated by farmers who are doing it under the real conditions where farmers are working in. What do you do when you have a wet spring? What do you do when you have a hot summer? And you have to, over years, show farmers, demonstrate to them how these practices are implemented, and how do you adapt those practices when you get these variable conditions.
I would totally agree with that. And so you can see there's a sliding scale when scientists are working with farmers. We're thinking about credibility of the science versus real world practical applications, right? And moving from controlled experiments into more of an uncontrolled, unmanaged situation that more applies to your situation on the ground. And I think that that's absolutely critical. There's a group of us that are trying to put a new proposal in with USDA, their Sustainable Agricultural Systems call, that does just that. It's really about nodes in Ohio, Missouri, and Minnesota, and trying to think about, letting farmers decide what questions we need to decide at those particular locations and building, real world applications here. That's what we need. We not just necessarily scripted ideal conditions, right?
Roger, does that resonate for you?
Yeah, I'm like trying to go down every rabbit trail here because I wanted to elaborate on what Dr. Wilson said with the it has to be a win-win, I guess. My biggest concern in this whole thing, and this administration coming in and the move towards climate change practices. I'm stumbling over my words here, but my biggest concern is it's kind of opening the floodgates for a gold rush with these companies and these carbon credits. And when I said I wanted some transparency, that's kind of what I wanted to elaborate to. I don't want us to just be the pawns in this whole thing. I've been doing cover crops for 10 years. I don't need to know what the benefits are. I already know what they are, but I don't want to be taken advantage of with some of these companies and the carbon credits and these other things. Not to get too much off the subject here, but I think the solar farms are kind of the same deal. We're looking, there's a lot of the power from these solar farms being exported out of our community. And I think the carbon credit thing could end up being the same way. We have to keep some of the benefit local. And so I'm kind of concerned about how we accomplish that.
That's really very, very interesting question and challenge. Aaron, are people looking at that?
No, I think, it's spot on. And I guess I think of it kind of our historical view, which is very, very much as extractors of resources versus thinking of those resources as benefiting the community. But I think Roger's spot on. I mean, in terms of like solar farms, I think, I'm a big proponent of solar energy. I'm a big proponent of wind energy. And of course, it has to be balanced between the common good and the local good. And there has to be benefits that then support the activities that farmers are doing at the local scale. So I would agree with that. There are opportunities of generating electricity, putting it back into the grid, but where, what's the compensation there? That transparency, again, having that transparency between what's being generated. So that was an interesting point, Roger, to think about, though, this gold rush kind of idea with the carbon credits. I think it's something I'll probably talk more about with some of my colleagues and stuff. I think that was a really interesting point.
Well, and the fact that there's urgency is good, but is it going to, lead to some solutions that will truly be helpful? Yeah. And which is also kind of like the utility scale solar arrays. The part of the power grid that we are a part of, from Illinois to the East Coast down to Kentucky, it turns out that the cheapest flat land happens to be pretty much around us in Ohio. And so it's like, yes, that power will go through all that whole chunk of the grid, but will those solar arrays be de-installed when their life is of useful solar generation is over? And we don't know. So sometimes we're, creating unintended consequences, that I think the importance of water in our area that you pointed out, and I think somebody in the chat was saying is really a key point, Aaron. You know, look at what climate change is doing, and you know, there's so many areas of the world that are getting drier and drier, and the fact is we've got a lot of water underground here, and if we do need to irrigate in order to have food security, I mean, we've got the possibility to do that. So there's
it does point up the importance of the work that you do, Krista, and the other land trusts and the American Farmland Trust as well, because Ohio has some of the most important farmland in the country. And so we don't want to take it lightly and let it be bought up and for various reasons, because it is really how the country is going to stay fed.
yeah, and watered.
No, and tangential, and this may be a bit too tangential, but there are, I mean, there's always unforeseen or unknown outcomes of certain things. So now what we know about our large solar panels and things as they become, I'm trying to think of the word, but basically decommissioned, you know, there's actually a secondary market for the US where they go to places like Iran, and Iran buy these decommissioned solar panels. And what they found is they have some serious, you know, heavy metal leaching when they get really old like that. And so, and of course, then that brings in a whole justification and ethics and things like that. So there are, you know, I've lived long enough in my life to know that there's no one single solution to any of our issues, and that we should be thinking about and, you know, being equipped with the most scientific knowledge that we know about things, and then using that to make the best decisions. So anyway.
Krista, if you don't mind me hearkening back to something Doug talked about people growing their own food. And Doug, I appreciate that you as a small farmer are encouraging that, because I know you count on direct sales. But I wonder what our farmers think in terms of the percentage of food security that's really going to be based on people growing in their own yards or community gardens. Do you see that as an increasingly important part of our regional food security?
I think it's going to be a part of it. Like Aaron was talking about, you know, like all of these things are going to need multifaceted approaches to the problem. So I think, you know, growing your own, but then you have limitations to, you know, enough land access to grow your own food as well. So, you know, the community gardens, the various initiatives in different urban environments, urban farms, I think are going to help address those, but I don't think they're the only solution.
I think that also the erratic nature of the climate changes. I mean, there's, you know, we can't suddenly grow the variety of foods that we love to eat, you know, year round, and so it's a, you know, there's limitations to how much we can do. It's again, just next week we're definitely going to be delving much more into, you know, what can we do in terms of getting as much diversity as possible on a local basis and keeping those dollars local. That is really important, and I hadn't ever really thought of carbon market as a way to ship yet more dollars away from our local ag economy, but it might be, you know, and so that's a very concerning thing. You know, we really do have to think about that and look at that. And does anybody else just have something you want to make sure to mention? Susan, feel free to jump in. Aaron, Roger, Doug, or anybody want to get anything in chat that's a burning concern? We want to let you enjoy your Saturday here.
Well, I would like to say on Community Solutions behalf, and I'm sure you'll say that as part of TLT as well, Krista, we're so grateful that people have joined us on this Saturday afternoon, and especially Aaron and the farmers. It's really great to hear stories from the field. So thank you so much.
It is. And the dialogue leading up to this has been just so wonderful. So just really appreciate that, everybody. Please do look online for the whole series, and we hope you'll join us. And we also have another sweet treat next weekend. In addition to our program on March 6th, we're going to do Mother Nature willing, a virtual sugar shack presentation through at Flying Mouse Farms through Tecumseh Land Trust. So take a look if you have any, children, grandchildren, friends, or yourself who have never been a part of that wonderful manifestation of the seasonal cycle. We hope that the sap will be running and there'll be sap to boil, but one way or another, we'll talk about that process. And of course, that is definitely one of the local products that's very, very much related to circumstances of climate change. So thank you all. Thanks everybody for participating.